Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary when I agreed to help Jacob with his homework that evening. I'd just come in from trimming the roses out front when Marlene, my neighbor from 2 doors down, called in a bit of a panic. She had an emergency shift at the clinic and asked if I could watch her son for a few hours. Of course, I said yes. Jacob had always been polite, a little shy, and serious for a 14-year-old, but he had a quiet charm that reminded me of my own son when he was that age. I made a quick pot of chamomile tea, changed into something more comfortable, a loose beige sweater and soft navy slacks, and went to set the dining room table with Jacob's school books. I liked how quiet the house felt at that hour, with the evening sun pouring in through the lace curtains, coloring the wooden floors in warm amber light. Everything felt still, peaceful. Jacob arrived with his backpack slung over one shoulder, a little breathless, and thanked me right away. I offered him a glass of orange juice and a plate of oatmeal cookies I'd made the night before. He smiled shyly and sat down, pulling out his notebook. We were working on some kind of civics assignment, something about community involvement, the structure of local government. Honestly, I hadn't looked at that kind of material in years, but the moment I leaned in beside him to read through his notes, it all came back to me. As we worked, I noticed the way he glanced up now, and then stealing small looks at me, then quickly lowering his eyes again. At first, I chalked it up to awkwardness. He was a teenage boy, after all, but there was something more in the way he sat so straight, trying to seem older than he was. It reminded me of the way my son used to behave when he was trying to impress a teacher or someone he looked up to. I smiled to myself but didn't say anything. He had nice handwriting, neat, careful. He listened intently, nodding, asking questions, and taking notes in the margins. We talked about how communities functioned and how even small acts could ripple out and change lives. I mentioned volunteering at the food pantry during the holidays and how, sometimes, just being there to listen to someone made more of a difference than I ever expected. He seemed to like that, and I could see a spark of thoughtfulness in his eyes. After an hour, I noticed he seemed a little distracted. His pencil hovered over the page, unmoving, and his brows were drawn close. I asked if everything was okay. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah. It's just, I guess I was thinking about what you said, about how even little things matter, like helping people, being kind. I nodded, gently encouraging him to go on. He looked up at me, and his eyes, so young and honest, met mine with a kind of intensity I hadn't expected. You always talk to me like I'm not just a kid, he said, his voice quiet. Like what I say matters, even when it's just about school stuff. I felt my chest tighten a little. It wasn't something I did intentionally, but I realized it must have meant something to him. You're thoughtful, Jacob, I said, resting my hand gently over his for a moment. You see things a lot of kids your age don't. That's important. He didn't pull away, but he looked down, his cheeks flushing. For a second, the room felt very still, the kind of quiet that made the ticking of the wall clock seem louder. I pulled my hand back and reached for my tea, trying to ease the moment back into something lighter. We finished up the assignment, and I helped him organize the papers back into his folder. He lingered a bit, gathering his things slower than necessary. As he stood up, slinging his backpack over one shoulder again, he paused at the door. Can I ask you something? He said, voice almost a whisper. Of course. He looked at me with a searching expression. Do you ever feel like you're the only one who really listens to people? That caught me off guard. I didn't know how to answer right away. I wasn't expecting that kind of question from him, especially not then. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But I think that's why I try to be someone who listens, even if no one else does." He nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward and wrapping his arms gently around my shoulders. It was a simple hug, but it felt meaningful, full of emotion that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Thanks," he said softly. And just like that, he was out the door, walking down the sidewalk toward home under the deep blue sky of approaching night. I closed the door slowly, my hand lingering on the knob. Something about that moment stayed with me longer than I expected. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, not with the eyes of a boy, but of someone who'd seen kindness and held onto it like it meant something. And maybe that's what we all want in the end, to be remembered that way, to matter, even just for a moment. The next morning, I found myself thinking about Jacob more than I wanted to admit. I stirred my coffee at the kitchen table, watching the steam curl into the morning light, and tried to make sense of why his words had stayed with me. There was something about the way he looked at me, really looked, that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not since my son had moved across the country with his family, and not since my husband had passed. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't inappropriate. It was just human, honest. And in that honesty, there was a warmth I hadn't felt in a long while. Around midday, Marlene texted to thank me again, and asked if Jacob could stop by after school for help with another assignment. I agreed without hesitation, even though I told myself it was just about the homework, just about helping. Still, I set out his favorite cookies again and made sure the house was tidy, and the lighting felt soft and inviting by the time the school bell would have rung. When he arrived that afternoon, he was smiling in that quiet way he had, polite but thoughtful. We exchanged pleasantries, and I led him back to the dining room table where his books were already waiting. This time, the topic was English literature, Shakespeare, to be specific. Julius Caesar. I laughed a little when I saw the assignment. It had been my favorite play to teach back when I was a substitute teacher years ago. The irony and betrayal, the emotional undercurrents hidden beneath all those lofty speeches, it had always fascinated me. We read through some passages together. I encouraged him to think about Brutus, about the complexity of loyalty and doubt. He was engaged in a way I hadn't expected, pointing out things I hadn't even noticed at his age. "You really care about this stuff," he said at one point, looking at me with admiration. "You talk like it still matters." "It does," I said, surprised by the emotion in my voice. "Even the old stories, they remind us that we're not so different now. That people have always felt betrayed or lost or brave, even when they don't know how to say it." He looked at me quietly, then nodded. "You make it feel like it's okay to think like that. Like feeling things isn't weird." There was something in the way he said it, like no one else had ever told him that. Like maybe he'd always been a little too sensitive for a world that didn't reward soft-hearted boys. We moved from literature into a conversation that drifted gently, unplanned, into personal things. He told me about a teacher who had made him feel small, about how sometimes he wished he could be anyone else, how he didn't think people really saw him, not the way he wanted to be seen. "You know," I said, "you don't have to change who you are to matter. The people who matter will see you, eventually. They'll notice the quiet things, the details you think go unseen. Like you do." His words struck something in me, and I had to pause, feeling an unexpected lump in my throat. I nodded slowly. "Like I do." He shifted in his seat, brushing his fingers along the edge of his notebook. "You ever wish someone would say that to you?" he asked. I stared at him for a moment. Every day. We sat in silence after that, not awkward, but full. I could feel the emotional weight of the moment stretch across the table like a thread pulled tight, but not strained, just there, real. After a while, we went back to the homework, but it was slower now, less urgent, like we both knew something had shifted, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but like the changing of a season. Gentle, inevitable, and quietly beautiful. When it was time for him to leave, he stood at the door again and turned toward me, his backpack hanging loose at his side. "Can I come again tomorrow?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "Any time." He gave me a small smile, then added, "I don't think it's just the homework." "I know," I replied softly. And then he walked down the path, just as before, but everything felt a little different now. Not wrong, just more, fuller, as if the space between us had taken on its own kind of meaning, unspoken, but deeply understood. When I closed the door that night, the house didn't feel quite so still. It was like some piece of it had been warmed by something unexpected, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was simply passing time. I felt connected, seen, and maybe, just maybe, needed. By the third evening, it had become a kind of quiet ritual. The soft knock on the door around 4:30. The way Jacob stepped inside with a gentle hi, like he was entering a space sacred in its stillness. I'd already begun to look forward to that moment, the sound of his voice breaking the silence in my home. That day, the sky was overcast, and the wind carried a faint chill. I had lit a candle on the side table in the living room, something warm and amber-scented that filled the air with comfort. Jacob sat down at the table, but this time he didn't take his books out. He glanced at them in his backpack, then looked at me. "Can we just talk today?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. Of course. I brought over 2 cups of hot chocolate instead of tea, and we sat there, the steam rising between us like some kind of gentle veil. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt deliberate, like we were giving each other room to breathe. He asked me questions about when I was his age, about what school was like, what I dreamed of becoming, what I feared most. At first, I laughed, brushing it off, but he was serious, and I realized no one had asked me those things in years. "I wanted to be a writer," I said, smiling at the memory. I filled notebooks with poems and stories, some good, most terrible. "Why didn't you?" "Life, marriage, kids, bills." I gave him the answer I always gave, but this time it sounded too thin, too easy, so I told him the truth. I think I stopped believing my stories mattered. He looked at me with those wide, intelligent eyes of his. They do. You tell them without even trying. Just talking to you, it's like hearing a story. Like everything has meaning. There was such sincerity in his voice, I had to look away for a second. No one had ever said that to me, not even my late husband. I'd spent so many years in roles, wife, mother, neighbor, that I'd forgotten the part of me that once wanted to be something else. Something whole just for me. Jacob's presence, his questions, his curiosity, it stirred that part back to life. He leaned forward a little, his elbows on the table. "You make me feel like I'm not weird for caring about stuff, for thinking too much." "You're not weird," I said gently. "You're sensitive. That's rare and precious. Don't let anyone take that from you." He smiled again, but it was smaller this time, more vulnerable. "Sometimes I wish you were my mom." The words surprised me, not in a shocking way, but in how much they moved me. I reached across the table and touched his hand. I'm not your mother, Jacob, but I care about you. Deeply. That matters too." He nodded, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The wind picked up outside, brushing the windows with the soft rustle of leaves. Inside, we sat in a bubble of understanding, held together by something wordless and real. After a while, he asked if he could show me something he'd written. I agreed, and he pulled out a folded sheet from his bag, a short story, handwritten, raw, and beautiful, about a boy lost in a forest who meets a woman who helps him find his way, not by leading him, but by listening. When I looked up after reading, he was watching me closely. "I wrote it after that first night," he said. "I didn't know how to say it, so I made it a story." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I reached over and hugged him. He hugged me back, this time with both arms, holding on like he was anchoring himself to something steady. "You're going to be a wonderful writer," I whispered. "Never stop." He pulled away slowly and looked at me with a softness I can't quite describe. It wasn't teenage infatuation. It wasn't misplaced emotion. It was respect. Deep, pure respect. And something else too. Gratitude, maybe. Recognition. He didn't stay much longer after that. He had dinner waiting at home. But before he left, he looked at me and said, "You changed something in me." And when I closed the door, I stood there for a long time, holding the story in my hands. The house around me felt less like a place I lived in, and more like a place that had meaning again. As if through him, I'd found a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. It had been a few days since Jacob last came over, and in his absence, the silence in my house felt heavier, not lonelier, but full. Full of memory, of reflection, of something I hadn't quite put into words yet. I had his story folded carefully in a drawer, next to a few old photographs and postcards I couldn't bring myself to throw away. It felt right there, nestled among things that had once meant the world to me. Now his story meant something too. Then one afternoon, the knock came again. I opened the door, and there he was, holding a book this time instead of his backpack. He smiled, but I could tell something was different. His face was serious, but calm, like he'd rehearsed whatever he was about to say. "Can we sit outside?" he asked. "It's nice today." It was. The early spring air had just enough warmth to be pleasant, and the garden was beginning to show hints of green again. I led him to the wooden bench under the old maple tree. It creaked slightly as we sat. A breeze rustled through the branches overhead. He handed me the book, a collection of short stories. I turned it over, brows raised. "It's yours now," he said. "You should write again. I think. Maybe you stopped too early." I smiled, brushing a thumb across the cover. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say," he replied, eyes locked with mine. The air between us stilled. I wasn't sure what to do with that sentence. It was beautiful and a little heartbreaking all at once. How often had I wished someone would truly hear me? Now here he was, this young man on the edge of something, offering back all the pieces I'd long buried beneath routine. "I've been thinking a lot," he continued, "about who I am, what I want, and about what it means to connect with someone." I stayed quiet, giving him the space to find his words. "I know there's a lot I don't understand," he said softly. "But I do know how it felt to be here with you, safe, like someone saw me without judgment." He turned toward me, and I could see the emotion behind his eyes. More mature than his years, but not forced. It came from somewhere deep and true. "I'd want to be someone like that for other people, like you've been for me." I felt something shift in my chest, like a quiet ache mixed with pride. I reached for his hand, not in comfort, but in solidarity. "You already are, Jacob. You just don't know it yet." He leaned back, looking up through the branches. "It's weird. I didn't expect to feel so much here. With you." Neither did I admit it. But maybe that's the gift of it. The unexpected can wake us up in ways nothing else can. He sat for a while, watching the leaves. I could feel him thinking, not rushing it, just letting it settle. Then he said something that I'll never forget. "You reminded me that I'm allowed to feel, to care, even if it's complicated." Tears welled up before I could stop them, and I let them fall this time. There was no shame in it, just truth. I had spent so many years hiding parts of myself, guarding old wounds, making space for others, but not always for me. Jacob stood and looked down at me, not like a boy anymore, but like someone stepping into himself. "I don't know what this will mean later, but I'll always remember you, not just as my neighbor, but as the first person who made me feel like I could matter to someone." I stood, hugged him one last time, this time knowing that it was goodbye, at least in the way it had been, and that was okay. Some moments aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to shape us. As he walked away down the sidewalk, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something else. Peace. Later that evening, I opened a fresh notebook, the kind I hadn't touched in years. I didn't know what I'd write yet, but I knew I would. And as the sun dipped low and the world grew quiet, I began again. Not as someone trying to fill the silence, but as someone who finally had something to say. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the story was mine to tell. Ask ChatGPT